Welcome everybody to our Wednesday wisdom session. I think a few of you have joined us before, so you'll know that the aim of the session is to try and give you a topical HR issue, how we would go about resolving that, and it's generally questions that we've been being asked on a daily or weekly basis by our clients. Now that you're registered, you can join us every week if you want to. Don't feel that you have to, but hopefully you will. If you could all just keep yourselves on mute, please, just for the first part of the session. The reason for this is we are recording the session this morning, and I have it set to record just the presentation and myself speaking. If you're not on mute and you do get some background noise, it will come on, and obviously we'll put you on the video, and we would like to be able to share it on our social media, so we'd rather that didn't happen. We do tend to share the video afterwards, as I said, on our social media and on our email, and that's usually for the people that haven't been able to join us today. I've got Lisa with me on the session. Lisa's going to keep an eye out on the chat box, so if you do have any questions, please do fire them across to Lisa. You can do it on the group chat, or you can message her privately if you need to, and we'll answer them at the appropriate time. If you're not familiar with Zoom, the chat box is usually somewhere down on the bottom of your screen. Just a quick point to note, these sessions aren't designed to give you full HR support. If you have got a specific case that you need help with, please email us, please call us, or please stay on the line at the end and we'll attempt to help you. We don't want to be discussing specifics and going into too much intricacies of cases, but we are happy to give you a bit of an overview. Okay, so for those of you who joined us a couple of weeks ago, we discussed the top 3 questions we were being asked in relation to redundancies, which is obviously a very topical thing at the moment. This week, we're going to delve a little bit deeper into one of those questions, because we're still receiving a lot of calls from clients asking us, can I use redundancy as a reason to get rid of that employee whose face just doesn't fit? So this is somebody who maybe doesn't fit in with the company ethos anymore, they've been underperforming for a while, various different reasons. Can I use redundancy to get rid of that employee? Now, you may remember, if you were with us, that the answer to that question was no. Okay, so just to recap, redundancy is about the role, not about the person. There are only so many valid reasons to make redundancies, and they are that your business ceases to operate or exist, that the job role no longer exists, or that the job role or business doesn't exist at the location it was being carried out at. They are the reasons for redundancy. There are no other reasons you can make someone redundant. If you use redundancy as a reason for dismissal for any other rationale besides that, you will leave yourself at a high risk of a very costly and time-consuming tribunal claim. And given that redundancy is supposed to be about saving the business money, I'm sure that that's not where you want to be. So we thought we'd delve a bit more into what your options are for that difficult employee, that one who's been underperforming or just doesn't fit in. So the first option is to use your performance management or disciplinary process to address the problem. Now, a common problem that we face often is that managers aren't picking up and dealing with performance issues. That's usually because they either don't know how to manage those performance problems, or they fear conflict and they shy away from having those discussions. Hence the lovely picture there of the duck with its head in the water and its bum in the air. Performance issues can drag on for months and sometimes even years. We have known clients that have come to us that have had poor performing employees for years, and they're never challenged. But now that businesses are reviewing their financial position, they feel now it's finally time to do something about this. Just to reiterate my first point, it would be really unsafe to dismiss someone on the grounds of redundancy because they are performing poorly. Presumably, you're still going to need someone to fill that role. You will look to recruit or fill the role with an existing employee, so redundancy is definitely not applicable. Of course, we'd always recommend that you have a good performance management structure in place and use reviews and objective setting to avoid any long-term performance issues that drag on without any recourse. But we're going to assume in this instance that that hasn't happened. So we can use the current situation to our advantage in that we can start afresh now with this person. So they may be returning to the office from working from home or from furlough, or they might have been working through, and business is generally just changing at the moment. So it's a good time to book in that review and review their performance with them. Now, it's really important here with underperforming employees to find out if this is a capability or a conduct issue. So the way I always think of this is the easiest way to remember it is a bit like Can't Cook, Won't Cook, if any of you remember that programme that was on in the sort of 90s and early 2000s. A capability issue is where they can't cook, so they're not able to do it. Now that might be down to a lack of training or support, or it might be that they've got something going on in their home life or with their health that's having an impact on their work, but for whatever reason they're not able to perform to the standards you want them to. If they won't cook, if they simply won't do what is asked of them, despite the fact you've given them training, support, etc., that then becomes a conduct issue. Now, conduct issues are harder to resolve because obviously with a performance issue that's capability, you can do training, you can offer support, and oftentimes the employee will improve. If they're just reluctant to do it in general, that is obviously going to be harder to resolve that matter. But for either situation, you need to be setting expectations, setting clear objectives, and setting a time to follow up on those objectives, and making it clear to them what will happen if that isn't achieved, i.e. you will start your disciplinary or performance management process. Now here's the magic ingredient to all of that. You have to actually follow it through. So do the next review, discuss whether the objectives have been met, carry out a disciplinary hearing if not, and issue a warning. Don't forget you need to follow your formal process every time for that. So don't just do one review and set objectives and then let it just slide off into the ether for another year, because you'll still be facing the same problems. You have to actually follow it through, and you need to keep up that process until that employee either improves or until you get to the point where you can safely dismiss, which means they've had a written warning, they've had a final warning, and now you're ready to dismiss them. As you can probably tell by the process that I've just outlined, the biggest drawback to that approach is it's really time consuming. So it could take months for you to safely and effectively remove that underachiever, because you've got to wait for their performance to keep not getting better every time you issue that warning. But the good thing about a performance management process is that it is a very low risk option. So you don't want to do that one, you decide it's too time consuming. So what's the second option? Well, the second option is quite high risk, okay, and it needs really careful consideration. Call the employee into a disciplinary, go through your process and make the decision to dismiss them. Dismissing somebody without any prior official warning for this particular offence is definitely too harsh. So, you know, a judge would look at it and say, this is too harsh a penalty for what you have done. You haven't gone through your procedures. This is the kind of action that's usually reserved for people that commit things like gross misconduct, theft, fighting, etc. However, if you were already thinking of going with a risky redundancy dismissal, you might as well avoid paying out on those statutory redundancy costs and just go for your conduct or capability dismissal and take that risk. You're probably sat there now thinking, did she really just say that? And yeah, I did actually. I did just say that. But there is one big caveat to this piece of advice. You must be prepared to pay that employee a sum of money to settle out of court if they do decide to take it further. That sounds a bit mad. Yeah, it does sound a bit mad perhaps. However, if you weigh up the cost of the time that it takes you to performance manage that employee out of the business for the next 9 to 12 months, it might still work out cheaper to take that risk. Now, this is not a course of action that we advise lightly, so please do talk to us. All the potential outcomes need to be considered and accounted for, but in some instances, it can actually be worth taking that leap and just seeing what happens. Of course, you also need to be aware of the potential reputational damage that might happen as a result of doing that. So if an ex-employee is going to start bad-mouthing the company around the local area, that could have a knock-on impact on your future recruitment. So to summarise, this course of action is really high risk, but it can potentially be quite cheap, especially if the employee doesn't seek to redress in a tribunal. And I know Lisa's had that happen with one of her clients. I'm sure she'll share that story with you at the end. The third option is to look at offering a settlement agreement. So for a settlement agreement to be valid, there needs to be a genuine attempt to resolve a dispute between two parties. So for example, that dispute could be, well, we think you're not performing in your role, and your employee says, I don't agree, I think I'm doing a great job, I'm not going to change anything. And that is a dispute. So you do need to have some level of informal discussion first to make sure that that dispute does exist. Once you've done that, you need to invite the employee to see if they're open to having a without prejudice discussion with you. This means that whatever you say in that discussion or in any of the emails or letters that you use, provided you have used those words without prejudice, they cannot use that information to take you to a tribunal. Obviously, it's very risky having a conversation with somebody about potentially exiting them from the business, and what you don't want is for them to then use that against you down the line. When you're deciding on the amount of money that you would probably offer your employee as a settlement, you normally start with, as a guide, kind of what they would get for statutory redundancy payments. And there's lots of calculators out there to help you do that. And obviously we can advise you on that as well. And then you'd add a little bit of an extra sweetener to that amount. And you mustn't forget to take into account things like pension contributions, bonuses, commissions, car allowances, and anything else, any other benefits that they get as part of their standard package. At the moment, we've got no idea how tough finding another job might be for people. So it might be that you would need to consider offering a little bit more than normal, because it might take them longer to find a new job. But remember, the settlement payment is tax-free up to the first 30,000. So you know, normally that's a pretty good offer for people, that they're getting a lump sum there that's taxed, that's not got tax taken off it, national insurance, etc. But you'll also need to give and pay the appropriate notice period and any accrued but untaken holiday pay. But you'd actually need to do that in any of the 3 approaches that we've discussed. So really, that's kind of a figure that you've got to expect to pay out whenever you exit an employee from a business. In addition to that, you need to contribute to your employee's legal fees as well to get that agreement finalised by a solicitor of their choosing. Now, the fees can vary from about £500 up to £1,000 plus VAT. There isn't a fixed fee that you have to provide, but we would normally recommend, having spoken to a few solicitors, that you sort of put that figure at about £750 plus VAT for that. Presuming that all the parties agree on the settlement, happy days, they sign the document, you pay the money, and everyone goes their separate ways without any risk of a tribunal claim. But this is a voluntary thing. It says it in the word agreement. The employee has to agree. If they don't agree and they won't take the money and they won't go away quietly, you will still need to explore other options for exiting them, which means going back to point 1 or point 2. So just to summarise what we've talked about, rather than taking a risky redundancy approach to removing somebody, consider alternatives such as performance management, making that commercial risk, or a negotiated settlement. I'm going to stop waffling on. I'm going to pause the recording, and then I'm going to throw over to Lisa for any questions.